The drapery of Dionysus, from wine to the stage, vines, vows, and the village stage. You're lying still now. The room is quiet. Let us take a very slow walk backward into the cool air of an ancient Aegean morning, the kind where goats shuffle lazily through dusty courtyards. The dew is evaporating off stone thresholds, and somewhere, a man named Thespis is quietly adjusting a piece of linen that keeps flapping in the wind. But before we reach him, let's start somewhere far more fermented. The story of the theater curtain, yes, the humble piece of cloth, begins not with actors or stages, but with vineyards. And more precisely, with Dionysus, the god who ruled over all things ecstatic, chaotic, and, quite often, wet with wine. His followers, known for their spirited and sometimes overly spirited rituals, would sing, dance, and reenact myths to honor him. But these rituals weren't plays yet. They were noisy, open-air affairs often featuring masks, chants, and the occasional goat. Not just any goat, of course. A sacrificial goat. The word tragoidia, from which we get tragedy, literally means goat song. Not exactly a promising start for bedtime theater, is it? Still, imagine it. A circle of villagers, men, usually wreaths of ivy around their heads, stomping rhythmically on dirt, singing in repetitive patterns. The purpose wasn't entertainment, at least not in the modern sense. These early rituals were meant to blur the boundaries between divine and mortal, dream and wakefulness, much like what we aim to do here, drifting gently into myth as though it were memory. At this point in time, roughly the 6th century BCE, there was no such thing as a playwright. No theater as such. The action happened in open fields or around temples, and there were no curtains to draw. There was no backstage, no concept of actors separating themselves from chorus or audience. Enter Thespis. Thespis was an itinerant, a wanderer. He carted around a wagon, heavy with props, masks, and possibly bundles of cloth, though no one documented how carefully he folded them. Around 534 BCE, he did something a bit odd for the time. He stepped away from the chorus, stood alone, and spoke. Not chanted, not sang. He became a character, and in that moment, the concept of an actor was born. And what happens when one person steps forward to become someone else? That person must, logically, step back out again. Thus began the idea of separation, of scene, of identity, of performance space. And with separation came the need for concealment, which, you guessed it, leads us slowly, softly, toward the curtain. At first, there was no physical divide. Thespis likely used gestures and spatial positioning to step in and out of character. But as his method spread across the polis, others began emulating him. Soon there were playwrights writing speeches for individual characters, and with them came the concept of episodes, segments of narrative flanked by choral songs. Over time, temporary structures were erected, stages of wood, later permanent ones of stone. This skene, which gave us the word scene, was initially a low hut at the back of the stage, where actors could change masks. This, too, began as practicality, a place to hide, to wait, to become someone else. But those practical needs often evolve into aesthetic opportunities. Imagine the sun baking down on the open theater of Dionysia in Athens. It is midday, and the festival is in full tilt. Vendors are selling olives wrapped in grape leaves. Children are perched on their fathers' shoulders. The smell of salted fish hangs in the air. The crowd is restless. They've come to see a new work by Aeschylus, a man with heavy eyelids and an even heavier sense of moral consequence. The play begins. The chorus sings. An actor steps forward from behind the scene. But wait, what's this? A length of fabric, delicately painted, has been stretched across the front of the hut. It is drawn aside, and from behind it emerges the king of Argos, cloaked in sorrow and vengeance. A curtain, you wonder? Possibly not yet. Not as we know it. But the seed is there. In these early iterations, painted panels called pinocs were sometimes used to suggest settings. Occasionally, large cloths were hung to hide actors between scenes. Some historians suggest that the concept of the hall, or court, became more symbolic when enclosed visually, creating a liminal space, neither inside nor out, neither seen nor unseen. There is a word for this gentle shifting from functional to symbolic evolution, and it moves slowly, like water or myth. So why Dionysus? Why say he invented the theater curtain? Well, he didn't, not directly, but his festivals required space. They required performance, and performance required division of actor and chorus, audience and story, ritual and rest. The idea of hiding a moment so it can later be revealed, of drawing a line between what is sacred and what is not, belongs firmly to him. You see, the curtain is more than fabric. It's a promise. Something will happen, but not yet. And the moment it draws back, we are no longer in the agora. We are in Argos, or Troy, or Thebes. We've been transported. And that magic, that very boring, logistically messy, sometimes rope-tangled magic, is rooted in these early theatrical experiments. So as the Athenian skyline turned purple with dusk, and Dionysian initiates lit their torches, how exactly did they manage scene changes without disrupting the audience's reverence? And what, if anything, did they do when the wind refused to let the curtain fall? When curtains refused to fall? Let's drift back into that sun-warmed marble theater, tucked into the Athenian hillside. The air is thicker now, slightly cooler. The audience has grown still. You hear the creak of sandals on stone, the distant rustling of fig leaves, and maybe, just maybe, the brush of linen being drawn across a wooden beam. We left off with a question. What did they do when the curtain refused to fall? The answer, predictably, begins with an even more mundane truth. For quite some time, there was no curtain to fall. Early Greek performances, even into the classical era, lacked anything resembling the modern curtain. Plays simply began, and they ended. Actors exited. The chorus sang. The audience wandered off to buy more wine. Still, people don't like to wait around forever, nor do they like ambiguity. As performances grew longer and more complex, with more actors, more scenes, and more physical changes, something else began to evolve: the architecture. By the 5th century BCE, most major Greek cities had large stone theaters. These were not merely open-air bowls for performance. They were precision instruments of acoustics and symbolism. The skene, once a simple hut, became a solid backdrop with multiple doors. These doors were used to show transitions. Entering from the right might mean arriving from the city, while the left might indicate arrival from abroad. A god might descend via mechany, a kind of crane, while the dead might emerge via the ekaklima, a rolling platform. Still, all these tricks shared a flaw. They were exposed. There was no veil, no partition between setup and reveal, no moment to draw breath. Audiences saw the rolling carts, the creaky pulleys, and eventually, someone decided that simply wasn't very sacred. So, by the 4th century BCE, particularly during the Hellenistic period, actual curtains did begin to make their slow debut, not as full closures, but as scene veils, called surma or all curtains. These were likely hung between columns or across the front of the skene. And though no one wrote detailed instructions on how to hang one, because of course they didn't, we can assume they were attached with cords, fastened to the top and dropped or drawn manually. In fact, the concept of the curtain in Greek performance likely resembled a tapestry more than today's theater drapery. Picture large woven fabrics, brightly dyed, possibly embroidered, and certainly heavy. These were expensive items, time-consuming, the sort of object that required maintenance, storage, and perhaps an overworked assistant or two to ensure it didn't puddle awkwardly at someone's feet mid-monologue. Now let us ask, what happened when the wind blew? Theaters were open air. Breezes from the sea often swept through the seating tiers. A curtain hung from the skene could flutter, twist, or even yank loose. There are records, though scattered, of actors complaining about scene fabric disobedience. In one comic fragment, a character jokes that his lines were lost to a sheet more dramatic than the actor. We cannot be sure this was meant literally, but the idea lingered. Stagehands, who were often slaves or low-status workers, likely had the unenviable task of anchoring these early curtains. They might have used small stones tied to the hem or wooden rods sewn into the base. Others may have used poles to draw and redrape fabric manually between scenes, ducking down to stay out of view. And this brings us to a curious paradox in early theater: the desire to create illusion in a space where everyone knew it was illusion. The audience saw the fabric. They heard the squeak of hinges, the clatter of props. They knew the gods were men suspended by rope. And yet, they wanted to believe, or at least to pretend. This craving for suspended disbelief gave the curtain its power, not because it truly hid anything, but because it invited imagination. Let's imagine you are in the theater of Epidaurus, somewhere around 330 BCE. You are watching a performance of Euripides' Ion. The chorus has just finished a mournful ode. A figure, perhaps Apollo, must now appear suddenly in glory. But the actor is not yet in position. The sky is cloudless. The cicadas buzz, and then a curtain falls. A painted cloth, blue and gold, depicting the gates of Delphi. It is held tight by two assistants. The audience stares. A hush descends. From behind the veil, a booming voice begins to speak. Then, with gentle ceremony, the cloth is drawn aside. It is a simple trick, but effective. Over time, curtains began to evolve in function. Roman theaters, which borrowed and modified heavily from the Greek model, introduced more mechanical innovations. Some Roman stages used saparium, a backdrop curtain, and others featured alia, which could be raised and lowered. In fact, rather than falling from above like modern theater curtains, Roman ones often rose from below, drawn up from floor-level slots by pulleys. The shift from drawing a curtain sideways to lifting it vertically marked a quiet revolution. Audiences were now trained to expect a grand reveal, something akin to magic. And while the Greeks may have resisted such overt stagecraft in their serious tragedies, comedies often played with this openly. A character might trip on a curtain, mistake it for a toga, or even hide behind it like a petulant child. This blending of humor and function, this slight irreverence, belongs to Dionysus. His festivals encourage disruption, surprise, absurdity. The idea that a god could walk on stage, declare a prophecy, and vanish again through a fluttering veil was not only accepted, it was expected. But beyond logistics, curtains served a symbolic role. They marked a beginning and an end. They created space for transformation. Behind the curtain, a man could become a god, a king, a slave. A corpse might become a ghost, or a man playing a woman playing a man. Yes, this happened, could reemerge with a different mask and claim a new identity. In that way, the curtain was sacred. It wasn't just cloth. It was a chrysalis. And yet, for all their theatrical poetry, ancient Greek curtains rarely survive in the record. No physical examples remain. No full descriptions of dyes, designs, or attachment methods. We are left only with hints. A mention in a comedic aside, a scrap of pottery depicting stage props, an offhand note in a scholion on Aristophanes. But perhaps that's fitting. Theater, after all, is ephemeral, and so are curtains. They flutter into view, and then they vanish. Still, the question lingers. How did these humble veils evolve from ritual accessories to full-fledged storytelling tools? And what happened when someone, be it god or actor, refused to wait for the curtain to rise? The curtain rises, and so does civilization. The sun has fully set over the marble theater now. Torches flicker against rough-hewn stone, casting elongated shadows on the walls of the skene. The last notes of the chorus song have faded. The audience holds its breath, and then, with the slow, deliberate pull of a cord, or the gentle upward tug of a hidden mechanism, the curtain rises. In that moment, something timeless is enacted, a transformation not just of space or character, but of the audience itself. The stage, separated just moments ago by linen or wool, now opens onto myth, memory, or the mockery of everyday life. The curtain has done its work. It has created expectation, and now it lets that expectation bloom. We have arrived at the final thread in our story, the transition from ancient fabric and faith into structured spectacle, and how the theater curtain, born in ritual and shaped by wine god festivals, became one of civilization's oddest instruments of both illusion and order. Let's pause and consider this. What is a curtain, really? It's not simply a thing to hide things behind. It is a device of time. It announces that something is not yet. And then, when it parts or falls, that it is now. Ancient Greece taught us this subtly. The earliest dramatic performances relied on ritual, music, and shifting space. No real division existed between audience and actor. You could be sitting beside someone in a wreath who, 10 minutes later, would be calling himself Pentheus and berating Dionysian maidens. Curtains were not essential, at least not at first. But as storytelling grew more layered, the human desire for rhythm and structure began to press against the raw chaos of performance. Enter tragedy. Aeschylus introduced a second actor, Sophocles a third. More roles, more complexity, more need for exits, entrances, transformation. The scheme became permanent, and with it, the curtain, however crude, moved from decorative veil to theatrical tool. By the time of Euripides and Aristophanes, the need to separate what was seen from what was not seen became too valuable to ignore. Whether by flap, panel, hanging cloth, or drop veil, the curtain was increasingly used to suggest mystery, transition, and theatrical time. This is, in many ways, what Dionysus himself represented. Not wine, not madness, not joy, but transition. He was the liminal god, the patron of thresholds, of masks, of betweenness. His rites, whether peaceful or frenzied, always sought transformation. The curtain served his purpose perfectly, to hide what is becoming, and to reveal what has been transformed. When Greek theater found its way to Rome, this idea was refined with characteristic Roman engineering. The alia, a curtain that rose from the stage floor, was mechanically superior. It was embedded in stage design. Emperor Nero, fond of all things dramatic, is said to have experimented with colored curtains that could change during performance to reflect mood or location. Think of it, early stage lighting, but with fabric. Curtains also became status symbols. Wealthy cities competed to design the most elaborate backdrops, draperies, and theatrical veils. Alexandria, Pergamon, and Ephesus featured theaters with ornate facades and likely full-scale curtain systems. And though records are sparse, some Hellenistic-era texts mention pulley operators and curtain managers, roles so specific they must have been essential. And yet, in all of this transformation, the original purpose remained, not concealment, but delay. A chance to pause, to breathe, to anticipate. Fast forward a few centuries. The Roman Empire falls. Theaters decay. Curtains are burned or repurposed. But the idea endures. During the Byzantine era, religious drama sneaks back in, not in grand theaters, but in churches and monasteries. Biblical reenactments, mystery plays, and morality tales begin to fill the void. And slowly, as Europe slides toward what we now call the medieval period, the curtain changes roles again. From sacred veil to sacred screen. Churches begin to use curtains to separate congregation from altar, priest from laity. The function is familiar, to prepare the audience, whether secular or sacred, for revelation. And when secular drama resurfaces around the 10th to 12th centuries, the idea of performance behind a veil is already embedded in the culture. So when stages once again appear, this time on carts, platforms, or inside guild halls, curtains are included as a matter of course. And though their styles differ from their Greek ancestors, their logic remains the same. Across Renaissance Europe, the proscenium arch emerges, an architectural frame that echoes the skein of old. Curtains become grander, heavier, velvet. They open horizontally now. Rope systems are standardized. Backdrops are lowered from fly towers. But all of this, the grandeur, the gilding, simply builds on what the Dionysians hinted at thousands of years earlier, that there is magic in the unseen and wonder in the reveal. Even today, in modern theaters, film, and television, the curtain persists. Metaphorically, at least. The curtain call, the final curtain, the idea of waiting behind the curtain for your moment. These phrases endure because the curtain still carries weight. It is still, somehow, sacred. And this brings us to the curious question: why did Dionysus invent the theater curtain? Because he had to. Not as a craftsman, not with needle or loom, but as a concept. Dionysus, in all his contradictions, required a stage where transformation could be witnessed and believed, where a man could become a woman, a king, a god, where joy could turn to rage, love to murder, celebration to ritual. But for that transformation to feel real, it had to begin unseen. The curtain allowed it. It provided the darkness before the light, the moment of quiet before the first line, the veil between the mundane and the mythical. And what's more soothing than that? So the next time you watch a performance or draw your own curtain closed for sleep, remember that it is not just cloth you are moving. It is time. It is intention. It is history itself, layered and folded, drawn aside gently so that something else may begin. But before we close our own curtain on this story, one final thought. If the curtain creates the illusion of something beginning, what happens when there is no curtain at all? And did the gods, those messy, theatrical Olympians, ever truly wait behind one? The forgotten art of Roman concrete, why their harbors still hold. Ash, lime, and secrets in the sea. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the edge of an ancient Roman harbor. Let's say Puteoli, a bustling port near what we now call Naples. The year is somewhere around 150 CE. The scent of fish and brine thickens the air, mingling with the sharp bite of wood tar and salt. Ships groan as they bob gently in the water, tied to thick mooring posts carved from volcanic stone. And beneath your sandaled feet, there is something oddly solid, unyielding, a man-made stone holding fast against the waves. You don't notice it, of course. No one really does. You're far more concerned with your cargo, sacks of grain, bolts of dyed wool, the shouting of merchants who always seem one sentence away from scowling. The harbor works. It doesn't move. It doesn't crack. It simply is. And yet, nearly 2,000 years later, this concrete will still be here. Yes, still, holding its shape beneath the sea. How did the Romans manage this? And why can't modern engineers replicate the same durability with all our steel-reinforced towers and computer-designed seawalls? To answer that, we must go backwards, further back than even the Republic, to a time before Rome was grand, before Latin poetry, before Caesar, even before bricks. Let's return to volcanic ash. Italy, you see, is a land of fire beneath its soil. From Mount Vesuvius to Mount Etna, the region is punctuated with volcanism, lava, pumice, and a fine gray powder called pozzolana, named after Pozzuoli, the area where it was found in abundance. It is this powder, composed of silicates and alumina, that would become the silent hero of the Roman Empire's most enduring monuments. The Romans didn't invent concrete. That honor likely belongs to the ancient Egyptians or Mesopotamians, who mixed mud, straw, and gypsum into rudimentary forms. But the Romans, slow, methodical, observant, perfected it. They called it opus cementitium, a mixture of lime, calcium oxide, volcanic ash, and small stones or rubble. When water was added, it hardened, not just once, but continuously over time. The chemical reactions between the ash and lime caused crystals to form, binding the mass tighter as it aged. Unlike modern Portland cement, which can degrade and crack when exposed to salt water, Roman concrete thrived in it. You might be wondering, how did they know? Well, the Romans were not scientists in the modern sense, but they were keen observers. Builders like Vitruvius, writing in the 1st century BCE, noted that structures made with pozzolana remained sound even when submerged. In his treatise De Architectura, he carefully documented the ratios and mixing techniques, warning that not all ash was equal and that some mixtures behaved better in damp climates than others. It wasn't just harbors that benefited. This concrete formed the foundations of aqueducts, temples, baths, and even private homes. But nowhere was it more dramatic than in the sea. Roman harbor engineers built massive breakwaters, piers, and platforms using a method so simple and bold it sounds almost absurd today. They created large wooden boxes, floated them out to sea, and filled them with layers of volcanic concrete. These caissons would sink under their own weight, settle into the seabed, and harden into permanent anchors. No steel, no rebar, just ash, lime, and time. Think of the engineering confidence this required. No computers, no stress modeling, just a deep understanding of material, climate, and gravity. And what's more, this concrete didn't just resist the sea. It became part of it. Over time, the salt water didn't erode the concrete, it strengthened it. A rare reaction took place between the seawater, the ash, and a mineral called philipsite. This reaction created a rare hydrothermal mineral called aluminous tobermorite, which expanded inside the concrete matrix, filling in cracks and making the structure more resilient. Imagine that, a building material that heals itself. Modern scientists didn't fully understand this process until the early 21st century, when core samples from Roman harbors were analyzed using electron microscopy and advanced chemical testing. They were stunned. Unlike modern concrete, which becomes brittle and fails over time, Roman concrete becomes stronger the longer it sits in salt water. And yet, somehow, this knowledge was lost. How does a civilization forget a miracle material? Part of the answer lies in Rome's fall. As the empire crumbled, trade routes shattered, skilled labor dispersed, and knowledge, especially technical, niche knowledge, was no longer passed down. The formula wasn't protected in secret vaults. It was shared, spoken, taught by apprentices on job sites. When those job sites disappeared, so too did the practice. In the medieval period, builders returned to stone and mortar, wood and trowel. They built churches and cathedrals, glorious and towering, but often with shorter-lived materials. When concrete returned to popularity in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was a new formula entirely. Portland cement, stronger at first, but less forgiving with time. Still, one must ask, why didn't anyone think to dig up the old Roman harbors, to analyze their composition? Perhaps they did. Perhaps someone, sometime, walked along a still solid pier and thought, strange that this hasn't broken, and then shrugged, because it wasn't their concern. And here we are, surrounded by structures that barely outlast their builders, while 2,000-year-old sea walls remain stoic under the waves. But this isn't just a story of ancient chemistry. It's a story of patience. Roman concrete didn't dry fast. It couldn't be poured in bulk. It required time to set, often weeks or months before it was fully stable. Roman engineers planned accordingly. They didn't rush. They built in layers. They gave the sea time to settle before laying more. They worked with nature, not against it. And so, while modern construction values speed, projects completed in months, deadlines always looming, the Romans practiced a kind of architectural slowness that feels almost meditative now. Their concrete tells us, what lasts takes time. So as you lie back now, and imagine waves lapping against a long-forgotten dock, ask yourself, what other lost knowledge might still lie quietly beneath the surface, hardening, healing, waiting for us to notice? Builders without blueprints. Let's settle in again, slowly, beneath the warm Mediterranean sky. The harbor is calm. The sun glints off the water. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes across stone walls. You're standing beside a group of men covered in white dust. Roman builders mixing mortar by hand in large shallow pans. There are no blueprints, no printed measurements, just calloused fingers, memorized ratios, and the rhythm of work passed down across generations. This is not a romantic notion. The Roman world, efficient as it was, ran largely on the muscle and memory of human labor. And Roman concrete, opus cementitium, was no exception. Unlike modern concrete work, Roman construction didn't rely on complex scaffolding systems or industrial tools. Instead, projects were shaped by craftsmen, fabri, cementerii, and structores, who understood not just the materials, but the behavior of earth, stone, and time. And while you might imagine imperial engineers as austere men with scrolls and compasses, most Roman construction was astonishingly local. Builders used materials that were available nearby. If you were building in Baiae, you used pozzolana from nearby cliffs. If you were inland, you might substitute different ash or stone and adjust the mix accordingly. This localism had a paradoxical benefit. It encouraged experimentation. What we now call Roman concrete was never a fixed recipe. It was a method, a philosophy, a way of combining heat, mineral, and patience to create something solid and lasting. Let's take a moment to explore the key components more slowly. Lime. The base of Roman concrete was quicklime, calx, made by heating limestone in kilns. This was a common task throughout the empire, often managed by slaves or free laborers in lime pits. The resulting powder was reactive. Too much could make the mix brittle, too little, and it wouldn't harden properly. Getting the lime just right required smell, texture, and touch. There were no thermometers, just experience. Volcanic ash, pozzolana, the secret ingredient. Finely powdered volcanic material that reacted with lime and water to produce a slow-setting, long-hardening material. The Romans quickly discovered that ash from certain regions, like around Mount Vesuvius, produced better, more durable mixes. Builders recognized this not by chemical analysis, but through observation. They noticed which walls crumbled and which didn't. Aggregate, rubble or stones, the filler in the mix, often made from broken tiles, bricks, or river stones. Sometimes bits of pottery. Unlike today's carefully measured gravel, Roman aggregate was irregular and often repurposed from ruins or prior structures. This gave their concrete a unique texture, rugged, unpolished, but remarkably strong. Water, always a key ingredient. But in Roman concrete, water did not simply hydrate the mix. It initiated a chain reaction between ash and lime that continued long after the concrete had dried. In seawater, this reaction never truly stopped. Roman builders rarely wrote down formulas. But Vitruvius, ever our helpful chronicler, gives us one clue. He notes that the best ratio for a marine structure is 3 parts pozzolana to 1 part lime. Whether this was always followed is debatable, but it speaks to the idea that marine concrete, especially that used in harbors, was treated with reverence. And now, imagine the logistics. Say you are a Roman engineer tasked with constructing a mole, a large seawall extension for the harbor at Caesarea Maritima. The project must withstand waves, storms, and the test of time. But the harbor site is entirely underwater. What do? You begin with a caisson, a massive wooden frame, assembled on land, floated out to sea like a barge. The interior is lined with compartments. Then, slowly, as it's towed into position, Workers begin pouring in alternating layers of ash, lime, and aggregate, all mixed dry. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. Why mix dry? Because the sea provides the water. As the caisson sinks, the water enters and activates the mix. The lime begins to react with the ash. Crystals form. Time begins its work. The concrete doesn't just set, it grows. It becomes part of the seafloor. Barnacles attach to it. Small crustaceans make it home. The boundary between human-made and natural blurs. And here's the strange part. The Romans didn't know why it worked. Not in the modern chemical sense. But they knew it did. They knew that concrete made with pozzolana set underwater, and concrete made without it didn't. That was enough. In many ways, Roman builders functioned more like gardeners than engineers. They prepared the mix, placed it carefully, and let time do the rest. Their role was less about control and more about facilitation. They worked with the elements, not against them. And yet, what they built endured. The harbor at Cosa, the breakwaters of Puteoli, the submerged platforms at Ostia, all still visible today. Not intact, perhaps, but recognizable. Outlines holding fast against tides and centuries of salt. Now, let's return to the idea of lost knowledge. How does something so revolutionary, so effective, get forgotten? Part of the answer lies in economics. After the fall of Rome, trade collapsed. The quarries and kilns that supplied pozzolana were abandoned. Builders returned to simpler, more accessible materials: stone, wood, mud mortar. These worked well enough for their needs, and the cultural value of concrete faded into disuse. Another part is literacy. Much Roman engineering knowledge was never written down. Skilled construction was a practical art, passed from master to apprentice. When that chain broke, the art disappeared. And perhaps the most ironic loss? The later centuries didn't even want concrete. The Gothic cathedrals of Europe, the palaces of the Renaissance, they celebrated verticality, translucency, light. Concrete, heavy and rough, didn't fit that aesthetic. So for over 1,000 years, the world forgot the thing that had held Rome together. It wasn't until the 18th century that concrete began to make a comeback, and not until the 20th century that researchers began drilling into Roman structures to understand what made them last. Even today, scientists are studying samples from harbor ruins using scanning electron microscopes and X-ray diffraction. They've identified the rare minerals, like aluminum tobermorite and ettringite, that form in Roman concrete and are almost impossible to recreate intentionally. Some modern engineers now propose adding volcanic ash or seawater to concrete again, mimicking Roman methods. They call it bio-inspired concrete, which is a fancy way of saying something we forgot how to do and are now trying to relearn. But even now, with all our knowledge, we still struggle to match the longevity of those ancient mixtures. Modern concrete lasts 50 to 100 years. Roman harbor concrete, 2,000 and counting. So the next time you walk across a parking garage or rest against a concrete seawall, remember this. You're not just standing on stone. You're standing on memory, on the ghosts of ash and lime, mixed by calloused hands, laid into the sea by builders who trusted time to do the rest. And doesn't that make you wonder? If we once knew how to make concrete that lasted millennia, what else have we quietly forgotten? Legacy beneath the waves. The tide has risen, but you wouldn't notice unless you were looking at the barnacles. They've crept just a little higher on the worn stone. The waves slap lazily against the breakwater. If you stood on the same spot as a Roman harbor worker once did, overlooking the sea at Ostia or Caesarea, you might think, nothing here has changed. And that's precisely the miracle. The last section of our story takes us beneath the waterline, not just physically, but historically, into the hidden legacy of Roman concrete, how it shaped not just ports and piers, but the very idea of infrastructure, permanence, and civilization itself. Let's start again with the sea. Most building materials fear the sea. Salt corrodes, water erodes, frost cracks, currents shift and undermine foundations. Even modern steel-reinforced concrete begins to break down within decades when exposed to marine environments. Rebar rusts. Chemical bonds degrade. We spend billions maintaining bridges, piers, and coastal defenses. And yet Roman sea structures, unprotected, unpainted, unsealed, still stand. This isn't just impressive, it's humbling, and it forces us to ask, did the Romans know they were building for millennia? Probably not, but they were building with intention. Roman engineering philosophy was grounded in utility and durability. Their public works, roads, aqueducts, sewers, amphitheaters, were meant to serve the people, sometimes for generations. This was not merely civic pride. It was political. A well-built harbor wasn't just infrastructure. It was a monument to Rome's reach, its ability to tame nature and deliver grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, fish from Iberia. And concrete made that possible. Without opus caementitium, many of Rome's greatest feats would have been logistically impossible. Arches could be taller. Domes could be wider. Foundations could be poured in place rather than dragged in from quarries. And in the sea, where stonework was treacherous, concrete offered a miracle, strength in fluid form. Take the port of Caesarea Maritima, built under Herod the Great around 22 BCE. It was one of the largest artificial harbors of the ancient world, constructed entirely from Roman concrete in submerged caissons. The scale was astonishing. Giant platforms sunk into the Mediterranean, layered with ash and lime, forming the foundation of docks, warehouses, and administrative buildings. Many of these structures still lie beneath the water, visible to divers today. Their concrete remains intact. And what's striking isn't just that it endures, but how it does so. Researchers now know that Roman marine concrete grows stronger because of interactions with seawater. As water seeps into pores, it reacts with volcanic minerals, creating new crystalline structures, particularly aluminum tobermarite, that lock the matrix tighter. These internal crystals fill gaps, resist cracking, and actually strengthen the material. The concrete adapts. Modern concrete, by contrast, begins to decay the moment it's exposed to salt. Its internal steel corrodes. Its bonds weaken. It was designed for efficiency, not endurance. This comparison is not meant to shame modernity. Rather, it shows how history sometimes reverses itself. For all our technology, we are now learning to slow down, to ask how materials live over time, not just how quickly they can be poured. In fact, Roman concrete has become a model for low-carbon construction. Portland cement production is one of the world's leading sources of industrial CO2 emissions. Roman concrete, by contrast, used far less lime, fired at lower temperatures, and required no steel reinforcement. It was, quite accidentally, greener, which raises yet another question. Could we bring it back? The answer is complicated. We can imitate the chemistry, at least partially. Modern engineers have begun adding volcanic ash, seawater, and clay minerals to concrete to mimic Roman performance. Some projects have already been built with these mixtures: sea walls, underwater platforms, and even experimental harbors. But it's not just about chemistry. It's about mindset. Roman concrete worked because Roman builders accepted its limitations. It didn't set quickly. It couldn't be mass-produced in identical forms. It had to be shaped by hand, in place, over time. This patience runs counter to most modern construction economics, which prioritize speed, uniformity, and short-term performance. To build like the Romans would mean rethinking how we approach longevity, not just in materials, but in planning. Are we willing to build something that won't be finished for a year, but will last 2,000? Most of the time, the answer is no. But perhaps that's changing. In 2023, scientists in Italy and the US completed a major study on Roman concrete's self-healing properties. They discovered that small lime clasts, once thought to be flaws, were actually active participants in the repair process. When cracks form, water interacts with these clasts, triggering a reaction that fills the gap. It's like watching stone perform surgery on itself. And yet, this discovery was made not by breaking fresh concrete, but by drilling into the ancient harbor at Baiae. So even now, Rome teaches us. And perhaps the greatest lesson lies not in what the Romans built, but in how little they expected to be remembered for it. They didn't name their harbors after themselves. They didn't carve blueprints in stone. They didn't patent their formula or guard it in secret vaults. They simply built and trusted that the work would endure. And it did. Today, fragments of those old harbors sit quietly beneath the waves. Fish dart between them. Algae clings to them. Divers occasionally photograph them. Scientists analyze them. And the world spins on, mostly unaware that beneath its surface lies a kind of wisdom in stone. A wisdom that says, if you want something to last, don't rush it. Work with the world, not against it. Let time be your ally, not your enemy. Let ash settle. Let lime react. Let the sea shape your edges. And maybe, just maybe, your work will hold long after your name is forgotten. So tonight, as you drift off, consider this. If even the sea could not break Roman concrete, what else might be stronger than we think?